This is the Film Club, and I'm your host, Tim Rain. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the 90s classic film Pulp Fiction, directed by Quentin Tarantino, starring an excellent ensemble cast that includes Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta, Uma Thurman, and Bruce Willis, among many more. Pulp Fiction was released in the summer of '94 to critical acclaim while shocking, exciting, and confusing mainstream movie audiences. With its twisted timelines and controversial subject matter, people didn't quite know what to make of the film. Pulp Fiction's financial and critical success would bring a renewed interest in independent American cinema, not seen since the new Hollywood period of the 70s.
What's Fonzie like?
Cool.
Correctamundo! And that's what we're gonna be. We're gonna be cool.
My co-host today is Ryan Barton, better known in the Fredericton area as Crash, the charismatic radio host on Capital FM who does the afternoon drive show. He has also starred in numerous locally produced short films over the years. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on the show.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me.
Do you remember the first time you saw Pulp Fiction?
No, I don't actually. But I do remember the first time that I was like aware of it, because what, 94?
Yeah,
so I was
94.
9 when it came out, so like I didn't see it then. But a couple years later, in Space Jam, Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam, they have a thing like they're playing the Monstars, right, in Space Jam, and they're like trying to like eradicate the Looney Tunes. And Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd have this one moment where they like shoot out the teeth of one of the Monstars, and then it cuts back to them, and then like the theme song plays, and they're dressed up as Vincent and Jules. And I didn't get it, but I remember when that happened, my dad laughed, and I was like, I don't get it, and he just said Pulp Fiction. Like that was like, as if I was to know what that was about.
Right.
So like that was my first, and then a few years later, I did watch it. I remember seeing the like the front cover, like Uma Thurman on the bed with a cigarette and everything. And I remember seeing that at the video store, but had no idea like what it was. And then of course, I watched it later, probably in high school or something. You know.
I never thought we would be talking about Space Jam with Pulp Fiction,
Right?
but it
I
makes
know.
total sense. And in fact, I think they're actually putting out a new Space Jam movie.
Yeah, they are with LeBron James.
Yeah,
which I
which-
think will be hilarious.
Yeah, you know, I think Space Jam gets like, it didn't get good reviews, but it's not a horrible movie.
I watched it with the kids.
That's the thing.
That's
I mean,
fun.
we got kids, that's why, I guess.
Bill Murray's in it too. He's in everything.
That's right, yeah. So for Pulp Fiction, I remember watching Pulp Fiction, or when it was coming out, because I'm older than you. I remember it was like the ads on television.
Okay.
Were very, it was different. Like, I'm like, what is this? Like, it just looks different. But I was also aware of Reservoir Dogs at that time, so I knew it was going to be something special, like,
Right.
when I saw it, the trailer. But I remember going to the theater to see it, and when I was in the theater, it was full. And as you can imagine, Fredericton audiences, like people, when they were watching it, they didn't know if they should laugh.
Right.
So people were taking it very seriously, and I remember just laughing my ass off the whole way through.
Right.
Because
yeah.
it is funny.
Well, like it's two hitmen talking about cheeseburgers and stuff, right? Like.
And the holy of the holy.
Yeah, and it like just this idea that that's what hitmen do before they go out and like waste people, like that to me was that kind of sticks with me a bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a fun, I remember that year was a strange year when it came out, because for the Oscars you had Shawshank Redemption,
Right.
Forrest Gump, and Pulp Fiction, and I forget what the other one or two were. But
Yeah, it was a big year.
It was a big year, and Pulp Fiction to me obviously was the one that should have gotten it, in my personal opinion, in terms of innovation and being something
Right.
completely different. But you know, it was the first time, I think, for a lot of people that they experienced a movie that was so bizarre. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think for a lot of people at the time when they saw it, it was a film that caused them to kind of step back a little bit and go, what am I seeing? What am I watching?
Yeah, that's definitely what I thought of the first time I saw it. When I did see it, it was very, I was like, I actually kind of got confused a
Do you
little bit.
remember how
I
old
think.
you were?
It was somewhere between 9 and like 18. Like I watched it in high school somewhere. Probably after, like, I remember the first R-rated movie I watched was Terminator 2. So sometime after I watched it, but it was like I just started getting into watching all these movies, and then it was like I may have even watched it after Kill Bill. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, Pulp Fiction. Like for me, I think about it. I guess for me, the equivalent of Pulp Fiction was like the movie that I shouldn't watch that I wanted to watch was Clockwork Orange. I remember because it was X-rated and I had to check it out.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But Pulp Fiction was one of those ones where I think it was the first in a long time where independent film like did so well financially, like at the box office, and it really drew people's attention. And it had a lot of big stars in it. But people forget now that at the time Samuel L. Jackson wasn't known, John Travolta wasn't known. You know what I mean?
That's kind of what.
Or wasn't known, I should say.
Well, he was,
his
but
career
his career had like disappeared.
Nosedive,
which
yeah.
to me, when I watched it in the '90s, like after the fact, I didn't know that because he was in everything at that point, like Broken Arrow and Face Off, like all of these action movies that I was right into, right? So to me, it was like I didn't realize that. Oh, that was like the first time he had done anything that anybody really had taken him seriously with in a long time.
Or Sense even.
Yeah.
Like I mean, Get Shorty, what came out quite just a little bit after that was kind of known. That was a role for him. But yeah, that was a classic role, and it reinvented a lot of people's careers. And then Tarantino kind of went down as that guy who would like take actors that were kind of dismissed, like Pam Grier later on, or any of these actors that people just didn't really like know for like the last 20 years that you bring them in.
That's what gets me excited for any new Tarantino movie, is because I know that it's like he's going to assemble a cast that you might not necessarily think is like for this role, and then they do stuff that is just like Leo DiCaprio in Django. To me, that was one of my favorite performances that year. And I felt like he kind of got overlooked a little bit, didn't get the love that he deserved. But
no, but he did present white entitlement very well.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure.
I was gonna say, what are your thoughts on Pulp Fiction's non-linear storyline? Like that was something at the time too for a lot of people that it confused the audience.
Confused me the first time I saw it because I was like, well, how come they're in T-shirts now, and then like later,
like why is John Travolta alive?
Yeah, like it didn't make sense to me. I remember that was one thing that I remember the first time I saw it sometime in high school, because it was something that I'd never seen before, I think, in a movie. Like the movies I'd watched before were like, here's the start, it goes to the end. Like, and this jumped all over the place. But it's kind of like, it's like chapters, right? Like if you're reading a book or whatever, or like a pulpy fiction. It's broken into chapters, right? So you kind of just come in and visit different characters here and there, right? And meanwhile, this whole story is going, and then it comes right back to the very beginning of the movie with that diner scene, right?
Yeah, I loved how it did that.
Yeah.
And I think but it probably caused a lot of people to watch it multiple times. That's probably why it did so well at the box office.
Maybe.
People just got confused and had to go back again and see what was going on.
Great movie to rewatch.
Absolutely, and actually, that for you, did that become one of your staples? Like for me, it was, because you're a film buff too.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember watching it, and I remember watching it a bunch, and I think it was just always one of those movies that I just respected. You know what I mean? Like there are certain movies that you're like, I love that, just almost because you have to, as a sort of. But I know I owned it. I'd watched it a bunch of times, but I wouldn't say it's one that I just continually go back to. Maybe if it was on TV, I'd catch like bits and pieces. And that's the cool thing about it being broken up that way, is like you can watch sections of it and just kind of be like, oh, well, I watched that part, and you kind of get, the gist of it.
What did you think of, what was your, do you have an opinion on what your favorite storyline was? Like, I mean, there's a few, right? I always go with the John Travolta, Uma Thurman one, then the Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta line, and then the Bruce Willis and Ving Rhames.
I really like the Bonnie incidents where they're cleaning up the car. Like just the idea that he blew this guy's brains out by accident. Like he's like, oh man, I didn't mean to do it, And then so like this is a whole thing, and then they go to this guy's house, and it's like, my wife is gonna come home, and if she comes home, it's gonna be a disaster, right? Like that whole thing with Harvey Keitel coming in as the cleaner, like that might be one of my favorite things.
It's a great sequence, and the thing about it too, the only part about it, I think that I remember watching it going, Tarantino shouldn't be in his own movies a little bit,
right?
But at the same time, I kind of got used to it. I've seen so many times. I expect him to be that guy. In a way, he is that guy.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of works. But yeah, Tarantino had this love affair of wanting to be an actor, and I remember that was like he put himself in Reservoir Dogs. He put himself in that, and I don't know if he actually put himself in anything else after that.
I think he's got small things here and there, like just like little. He maybe not as prominent as he was in this.
Like
he got,
Hitchcock,
like, a whole
he just
chapter.
pops up once in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think he took the hit a little bit for that. But it didn't ruin it like Sofia Coppola did for Godfather 3. But that's a whole other level of bullshit.
Still haven't even watched the third one just because I've heard so many bad things about that. I just like, I'll stick with 1 and 2.
It's all, yeah. It's sometimes it's better to do that. Like it's like, you know, you heard, and it is kind of upsetting because I think it would have been a good film like if they just cast differently. But anyway.
But I do also like the whole scene like with Jules and Vincent in the apartment, like the whole delivery of the Bible verse and everything, right? Like that. Samuel L. Jackson is intense.
Well, yeah, that I remember. That was where I noticed him the first time. I mean, he was in like Jungle Fever with like he was in a few films before that, but I didn't know his name at the time.
Right.
So that was the one I remember. Actually, the first time it was like a talk show, like David Letterman or something, and he was talking about that scene, and I remember going, man, I got to see this movie just for the fro, like just the way it was. Like it was just a. But yeah, that kind of for him became the character that he's really played so many times since then. That intense, saying that speech, that biblical speech. How many other times has he done something almost identical? Yeah. The best part was that shark movie. I forget the name of it. What was
Shark
it called?
Tale?
No, the one that he was.
the Deep Blue Sea.
Yeah, where he gets killed and he's like giving a speech and they just take him out. Like it's like, okay, that's passive aggressive but effective. But yeah, no, I think for me, I think my favorite storyline actually is probably the boxing story.
Right.
Like I just thought, I think I just liked it because he was very playful in that story, and he was doing some visually interesting things, like in the taxi cab where he's using like a projector behind the scene, and it's like very surreal, you know. And then you know the way actually it was probably my favorite. It is my favorite, maybe next to 12 Monkeys, like Bruce Willis role.
Yeah, he acted the crap out of that.
Oh, he did.
Like I think so. Like for considering what you like think of Bruce Willis for, like that, you know, he's just kind of become like a John McClane type over the years, right? But here he's doing, I mean, there's still elements of that, but it's
flipped.
Yeah, you also see like a different side of him as well.
Well, I think he liked playing a bad guy.
Yeah.
But I also like the part where John Travolta and him are in the bar and he goes, you know, he calls him like, what are you going to do, punchy, or whatever that line is. Like, I thought that was great. But no, it's Bruce Willis's like performance, of course, was really good, and I felt that whole sequence. And then I think the one that really stood out for me too was you know, the scene where they're at the lights, where he's driving the little car after he shoots John Travolta's character. Yeah. And I remember watching that scene, and Ving Rhames is walking across the road, and he just guns it and smokes them. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, Ving Rhames gets up and starts shooting, and he just starts hitting random people. And I remember at the time going, you don't see that in movies. Yeah. Like, you don't see this kind of, and it was done almost in a comedic sense. Like, you're like, wow, like that was probably one of the scenes where I'm like, should I be laughing or should I be like shocked? Like,
he shoots an innocent bystander there or whatever. Right?
Yeah, and he just shoots like you can hear screaming in the background, but the action just follows Bruce Willis in his car. Like, and I thought that was almost like his choices, like as a director, what to follow has always been fascinating. Like even like the scenes like with John Travolta and him, John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson waiting to go into the apartment, and he just lets them linger down the hall and keeps it like a wide shot. Yeah, and just lets them go down and doesn't characters get out of frame basically and come back.
There's a lot of that, and that's one thing that I noticed a lot more. I think probably rewatching it, because it had been a little while since I'd seen it, but I rewatched it for this, and I did notice there's a lot of those long shots, like the adrenaline shot scene, like Eric Stoltz, who is hilarious as this the drug dealer, by the way, just like blasé about it all. But that whole thing of like where he's going in and checking in the other room for the little black medical book, like the camera's just sitting here, and you can see in this room and you can see Travolta in this room, and he just goes back and forth, and it's like the camera just stays there. And normally you would watch, like, or at least I've found, like, I'll watch a movie and I'll think to myself, like, cut there and go to something else. But watching this was like, I just you're like riveted to it, right? And you don't even think of that. You just kind of watch and go, yeah, this makes sense.
You know, it's interesting. I'm happy you pointed that out because I feel like that's what makes this film a lot different. Like people see this as the quintessential American independent film, but it really has a lot more to do with like the French New Wave and Godard and all these other filmmakers that would always place interest in like what's happening around the actors or what's happening, like just to kind of place them in a different way and set them in a different way. And yeah, I that's one of the things about that. When I think of Pulp Fiction, I think it's more European than anything.
Right.
But it still has like the pulp element, so it's this hybrid of.
It feels
style.
like the '70s too, right?
Yeah,
like French
but
Connection.
It's still
and
at the time,
like
I think, contemporary, right? I think
Yeah.
it's still set like at the time.
Well, it's set in the '90s, but then all the music that's in it
Everything's
too is like
from the
'60s,
70s.
like surf rock and
Yeah.
stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's pretty crazy, man.
he definitely plays around with like those timelines and styles, which I think he does now too. Like he'll have a movie that's a period piece and then have contemporary, like, you know, '70s funk and stuff like that from like for the 1800s. Like,
Yeah, there's no question. Like Quentin Tarantino is the quintessential like auteur film director who his style is so so his own.
Yeah.
That you know you're right when you watch the films that follow his credit sequences like Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction's credit sequence, you know, is so awesome where it's like the radio switches to a different song in the middle.
Yeah.
Like I love that. Like there's just all these little nuances that he does.
Yeah.
That separate him from the pack. And the one thing with Pulp Fiction at the time, when that film came out, there had to be 100 like wannabe Pulp Fictions.
yeah, probably.
There was
right?
a ton, and they weren't nearly as good.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them were telling the stories in very linear ways, and I don't think people really understood that it was his style, like his essence, that of what he placed himself, like from his perspective, that made it really interesting.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you, personal favorite moments. Do you have any scenes, like you did mention the scene with Harvey Keitel, but actually let's talk a bit about the Uma Thurman, like getting the needle. Like that apparently when that happened, people passed out like in the theater.
Right. I remember seeing that and like, because I was, you know, a teenager or whatever and very, you know, I don't know anything about that world. I mean, I still don't really know anything about that world, obviously, but like just the idea of like, whoa, like that's a big needle. And he just like violently, you know, slams that in. And like the way she just woke up, even just the way when she overdosed and just that whole notion of like and then like, you know, that's a terrifying like sequence really. Even watching it back, it's like, what is like happening? You know, I mean.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what people didn't really, why he was controversial for a lot of people is he didn't really say that drugs were bad. He wasn't like, you know, his depiction of like people doing things. He would humanize people that traditionally would just be, it would be black and white. They'd be bad or good guys or bad guys. Yeah. And the thing is like John Travolta like shooting up driving in the car, like that's pretty crazy too.
Yeah.
And there's this casual, like not just it's not weed, we're talking heroin, we're talking like, and so it's.
And he just casually bought it and like he's chatting with the guy and he's like, yeah, you mind if I do that here? And he's like, yeah, go ahead. You know, like it's just a very.
It doesn't come off like an anti-drug message. It just comes off like, oops, an accident. Like she thought that was coke and she ended up taking heroin.
I do like how, and we were talking about like camera and stuff like that and how it moves. Like at the Jackrabbit Slims, like when he's taking her there because he's just shot up and so he's high. Like the way the camera like follows him, there's almost like a disorienting. Like you kind of get the sense of like
floating.
It felt like he was high and it felt like you were there with him because like he's just kind of walking around taking it all in and you're realizing like this is a weird place. But when I watched it as a kid, I remember thinking like, I want to eat there. That seems like a really cool spot to go to. Like I want to sit in a car and get a burger and a $5 shake that's like the most amazing shake you've ever had, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about that film is that it was entertaining. It had its brutal moments in it, but there was enough levity to kind of make it so that you weren't feeling depressed. It wasn't dark.
Yeah.
Even though there's all this crazy stuff happening and violence and all this stuff. But someone pointed out to me one time that what's interesting about Pulp Fiction, for example, you don't actually see a lot of the violence take place.
That was one thing I noticed rewatching it was like a lot of it is like there's blood and, you know, like even in the car, it's like the blood but you don't see the actual. And I did find that for a movie that was considered to be so over the top in violence, I feel like he went more over the top in his further films or whatever, right? Like this one here, it kind of, there's a sense of like, it's there, but it's off camera a bit.
Oh yeah, when Bruce Willis and Ving Rhames gets tied up in the basement, I just remember being in the theater going, I could just feel people uncomfortable. It was like they're watching a porno or something happening.
Yeah. Oh, well, imagine me like a teenager watching it. Ving Rhames in a ball gag is like, that. If you want to talk about things that like stuck with me over the years, whenever I thought of Pulp Fiction, that's what I thought of.
Yeah, yeah.
Where he just like, I'm going to bring a couple guys in here with a pair of pliers and a blowtorch. You know, like the way he says that, and that whole scene probably was one of the more memorable things for me from the first time I watched it.
Oh, absolutely. The gimp.
Because I never, you don't expect to see that. Like, yeah, the gimp, they're keeping a guy in like a case in the basement of this like pawn shop. You're just like, what is this world? I didn't know this exists. Is this real?
I think you made actually, that's a good way to say it. It's Quentin Tarantino's world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the adult version of George Lucas. It's like, that's what it is, Pulp Fiction.
Imagine that's in Star Wars.
I'm sure it has been. Like, I mean, like people making fun of it.
Yeah.
Like,
Also to go back as far as memorable, Christopher Walken.
Of course.
The watch scene.
Yeah, yeah.
No question. He's only in it for what, that 1 minute, 2 minute segment or whatever, and it's like, my daddy's watch. Like the way he says that, like it was up my ass. You know, like, and he's just telling this kid this.
Yeah.
Just matter of factly, like, and I brought it to you like that. That was a great scene.
It was great, and yeah, it was basically just a monologue.
Yeah.
Like this long monologue in the middle of the movie.
And Walken crushed it.
Yeah, he did. And I mean, it's probably one of his most iconic performances. And the movie's 2.5 hours long, and he was 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
He made an impression for sure.
I was going to ask you about any performances. Like you're an actor yourself. Was there anyone's performance that stood out to you the most?
Well, I mean, that's the thing about Tarantino, man. Like he gets great performances from everybody that's in there. Like there's nobody in that wasn't good. You know what I mean?
Except for him.
Well, yeah, but even him though, within the confines of that scene,
No, it's
like
true.
I enjoyed like that energy. Like it's good that he wasn't probably in it more, but that in that particular moment, it was like I believed him as this guy that's like afraid of his wife but loves his wife and wants these guys out of there. But like Travolta, obviously, that was a very different role, which we talked about like at the time, and so he was great. Well, him and Sam Jackson and Uma Thurman, they were all nominated, right? Like,
Yeah, they were.
They were all.
Actually, Ving Rhames, who wasn't nominated, but that's where I first was introduced to him.
Ving Rhames was Luther in Mission Impossible to me. So to watch him in that setting was like, man, like it was a totally different guy, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I had seen him in other movies, but he was from Mission Impossible is what I noticed him from mostly. But one that did stand out, and I mentioned it before, is Eric Stoltz as the drug dealer.
It was far from Mask.
Like,
What did you think of the music or the score that was used? I don't even know if there was
I don't
a
think
score.
it is a score. I think it's all just like mostly. If there was a score, it's 60s surf rock.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like that. Well, I mean, the theme song for one that's probably the most iconic. Like, I think we were talking a little bit before.
Yeah.
It's like what other movie starts with a theme song like that? You know what I mean?
That sticks.
That sticks with you over the years. Like you just associate. Like this is a song that existed. It wasn't written for this movie. You know, Dick Dale, who just passed away. It was his version of this song that's been around for years or whatever, and he did like this surf rock spin on it. But it's like when you hear that, you think Pulp Fiction. It became like this iconic like song and symbol for the movie. If you hear that, you think of that movie.
Absolutely, and I think it helped resurrect careers like Urge Overkill. Like there's about other bands, and you're right. His use of music is incredible, and he would use, and it's not your conventional rock, like you said. It's like surf rock. It could be country. It could be twang. It could be
Funk.
anything, funk, soul. And Pulp Fiction, the soundtrack is as legendary as the film.
For sure.
You know.
And I think I read a thing too where he was talking about the surf rock aspect of it and how he just kind of like, he considers it's like spaghetti western rock, which I was like, yeah, it does kind of sound like, because obviously he's influenced by a lot of these spaghetti westerns, like he's, you know, incorporated that into his films.
In almost every film.
Yeah,
Since,
and
like
so-
Once Upon a Time in the Hollywood.
Yeah, it looks a lot like that
Yeah.
too. So like this whole notion of like that's how he's using it and that's what he thinks about it. I feel like, can you imagine just kind of being inside his mind a little bit and how that works? Like he's got to have like this encyclopedic knowledge of, I mean, music, and you hear about like when he's filming scenes, like he actually plays music on set to get people, you know.
I think that's
takes this
wicked.
whole notion of what you think a film set might be like or is, and then just flips it.
Absolutely. He has a strong air. Like I was talking to you earlier about how I think he's the closest to, you could see where that's a big Scorsese influence, like
Right.
more than visually, but using popular music as opposed to a score,
Yeah.
which he does for most of his films.
Yeah, I think the only time he used the score, I think for, was it The Hateful Eight? I think he had a.
Yeah, he did have score there, and but I mean Reservoir Dogs, another incredible soundtrack, and then he went on to work with like RZA and the Kill Bill
Yeah.
films. I mean, people think of him, of course, for his films, but his influence on
yeah.
music is also huge, and
Yeah.
resurrecting careers and using different genres.
And the way music influences his filmmaking, I
Yeah.
think, too. It's all interconnected there.
Absolutely, there's like a lot of his scenes are built around the music,
Yeah.
which I love.
Yeah.
So, just since we talked about all this stuff, how do you think Pulp Fiction, like now it's 94, or it was in 94, so that would be, Jesus, a long time.
It's 25 years ago.
Yeah, like, how do you think it holds up now that you watched it recently?
It's a classic. It's a, or I guess would you call it a modern classic? Like it's 25 years old, but it is like if you think of what his career became, even just for Tarantino, it's a classic, but just film in general, it's one of those highly respected moments in cinema and history. Like it kind of changed. I think it was a game changer.
It was a game changer.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing you mentioned earlier too was that he plays with eras, so you
Yeah.
don't know, like if you think it could be one minute you feel like you're in the 70s, the next minute it's, well, at the time, present time. But yeah, there's a timeless element to his movies too, and I think that's the element that kind of keeps him relevant as
Sure.
well. And I think Pulp Fiction actually, I know there's a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of people give a lot of credit for it, but I don't think it gets enough, which is crazy.
Okay.
I actually think it should get more acclaim than it does. But I think that, since Pulp Fiction, there's been so many movies that have taken from it,
Right.
that it's kind of left it a little bit as some people are like, oh, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
When in fact, no one's seen anything quite like it before.
No, that's true. And even with his movies, like I don't know that I consider it my favorite Tarantino movie, but it's definitely like there's a reason that if you don't like that one, you're not gonna like the other ones. I don't think.
What
know
is
I
your
mean?
favorite Tarantino film?
Inglourious Bastards, maybe.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think I don't know what it is, but I just
They're all good.
Christoph Waltz probably in that being, and I've always enjoyed Brad Pitt's acting because I feel like he's looked at as being like this pretty boy, like I mean he's a very handsome man, but like he plays like these characters and does it so well, and he can be funny too. And that movie, for being as, that's a pretty dark thing to talk about.
Oh.
And they they treat it like there's tons of comedy and comedic moments in that, while also some very intense. Like
The way he's been criticized too for taking things like
Yeah.
like the World War II, the Nazi imagery,
Yeah.
the use of racial slurs and stuff in his films, and he's never shied away from it. But at the same time, it feels like, it's challenging. I don't know what my thoughts are completely on it, other than it's not just entertainment. I think it's almost a revisionist history.
Sure.
So it kind of makes you reflect on that period.
Yeah.
And he's not being apologetic.
No.
So he's challenging people. So when you watch something like, the Inglourious Bastards, but even Django, you're like, Django, like he took some heat for that.
Sure
too.
he did, yeah.
Yeah. But Leonardo DiCaprio, like you said, like you watch that, like you don't walk away thinking he's a good guy.
No. Oh, no, that's the thing. Like when I say it's one of my favorite performances,
that's what
it's
I mean.
because it was so different for him, and for a guy like him to take a role like that and fully commit the way he did was like, to me, that was like, I enjoyed watching him in a sense of like, he was just chewing the scenery so much that it was like, you just want to see him. It's like Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah.
Like you just want to see more of him. Or like Sam Jackson and like the way he delivered like his dialogue in Pulp Fiction. You want to see more of that. And I think that's something that he really does super well, is like because if you think about his movies, it's a lot of talking.
Yeah.
And it's all about the dialogue, and
Yeah.
just like, and it makes just two guys talking or you know, a couple of people talking, and it makes it interesting and riveting, and you're totally into it.
He's a totally multifaceted director, and I think that's the thing. Like you said, his dialogue's great, his scenery, like his set design, his choices of how he shoots makes him like an auteur, and he's a legend.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for coming on to the movie club.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for letting me be here. I love movies.
I know.
I did. Oh, I want to say one thing that I wanted to mention before we wrap up, and I know you can probably edit this in or whatever. But when we were talking about like performances and things that stick out with me, one thing I noticed rewatching it was like, because Vincent Vega and Vic Vega are like brothers, right? Like in the Tarantino universe. And I think Michael Madsen was originally supposed to play the Travolta role. And so I'm watching the Jack Rabbit Slim like scene, and there's just a couple of like mannerisms and things that Travolta does that I'm like, it kind of looks like a Michael Madsen thing. Like you can see like, oh yeah, they're definitely brothers. Like it was just a subtle little thing that I noticed, but I was like, that's kind of a neat, whether it was intentional or not, I don't know, but me watching it years later, knowing all of this stuff, it played into that, and I watched it. It was just the way he kind of like, the way he took a drag off his smoke and tilted his head or whatever, like as cool as Michael Madsen does it almost.
Mike Madsen is such a crazy character too, and I think the truth is he was originally supposed to play that character.
Yeah.
And he probably wanted to kill Travolta, literally.
Yeah, I think what was it? He couldn't do it because he decided to be in some other movie, and I forget what the movie was. But I think he said after that he was like, that was a mistake. I regret that now. Like you look at that role that Travolta had, and like imagine, you know, Travolta was great in it, but Madsen would have crushed it as
Travolta
well.
didn't take that role, he would be a busboy for reals.
Probably, yeah. Changed his career.
Yeah. Thanks again, Ron.
Cool, man. Thank you.
All right.
Should we end it with like the twist?
I can't twist at all.
Do this.
You can do it.
I can't really twist.
I can't move.